All right, folks, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Sunny, and I've got my trusty mug of black coffee strong enough to wake a coma patient.
I'm Joe, sipping on my iced lavender latte because I'm fancy like that. Welcome back, you beautiful listeners. Tell me, what's the vibe today? You look like you just rolled out of bed and straight into the mic.
Oh, you're not wrong. I'm running on fumes and dreams today, but we're going to make this episode a banger. So grab your drink, coffee, tea, or something stronger, and let's dive into the chaos.
Chaos is our middle name. All right, y'all, buckle up, because we're about to spill the tea pun intended on today's hot topic. Let's get this party started.
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty complex and definitely talked about a lot.
Right. It's about understanding this particular viewpoint you hear about among some young people in China. The term often used is little pinks.
Exactly. And you, our listener, shared some really fascinating insights with us, analysis digging into what they believe, kind of the why behind it, and also how others see them.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
For sure. So our mission today is basically to explore these ideas, pull out the key takeaways, and just help you get a clearer picture of this whole thing.
And it's definitely a topic full of nuances, maybe even some contradictions, as we saw in the stuff we looked over. Trying to understand different perspectives, especially tricky ones like this, feels pretty important, you know?
Totally agree. Okay, so let's kick things off with the foundation. What's the core belief we're talking about here?
Well, boiling it down, it seems to be this really strong conviction that the Communist Party has, fundamentally made China better, richer, stronger.
And kind of the flip side of that coin is a view that Western ideas like, say, multi-party democracy or free speech, they're actually seen as negative, maybe destabilizing or chaotic.
Right. And the analysis we looked at points to some powerful reasons for this. The big one, maybe the biggest, is just the incredible economic change they've seen or lived through.
You really can't overstate that, can you? The speed of it. The GDP growth, cities popping up, that amazing infrastructure like the high-speed rail. It feels almost futuristic sometimes.
And it's personal, too. The notes highlighted that statistic about cars over 300 million by 2023. That's like one car for every 4 people.
Wow.
And you compare that to the kind of poverty their grandparents might remember from before 1949. It's a massive, tangible difference in their own lifetimes or their parents' lifetimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that point about personal experience came up a lot. Families moving from the countryside, escaping poverty, becoming middle class. They see that improvement, and it's directly linked in their minds to the party's leadership, to specific policies maybe.
Like those big poverty alleviation campaigns.
Exactly. It's not some abstract theory. It's like their family's story.
And working right alongside that economic story is the influence of the education system and, the official narratives.
Ah, right. That's huge.
Yeah. Education really emphasizes the party's role in China's success story. There's that phrase, without the Communist Party, there would be no new China. That idea gets woven in pretty early, building loyalty, tying national identity directly to the party.
And how does the West fit into that narrative?
Well, often negatively. Western democracy gets painted as chaotic or inefficient. The analysis mentioned examples like gun violence or racial issues in the U.S., or the refugee situation in Europe. These are used to show democracy's supposed failures.
Makes sense. And what about free speech?
Similar framing. It often gets linked to things like online rumors, hate speech, social division. Examples from Western social media are sometimes highlighted to argue that, free speech just leads to disorder. It creates a very particular, often unfavorable view.
Okay, so you've got the economy, the education. What else? Nationalism seems like a big piece, too.
Oh, definitely. This generation saw China become the world's #2 economy, host the Olympics, launch huge global projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. That's bound to fuel a lot of national pride.
And that success gets tied back to the political system.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that China's centralized model, the party's leadership, is just more effective at getting big things done. And there's often a perception, highlighted in the analysis, that Western countries, particularly the U.S., are actively trying to hold China back.
Kind of they're jealous of our success narrative?
Sort of, yeah. And seeing Western problems like wealth gaps, protests, messy elections like the U.S. in 2020, shown on Chinese platforms like Weibo or Douyin, that just reinforces the idea that China's way, that concentrated power does big things, is better. It seems more stable.
Right. And that stability thing connects back to history, doesn't it? That century of humiliation idea kept coming up.
It really does. That period from the 1800s to 1949, when China fell weak and vulnerable, it's taught extensively. It creates this deep-seated fear of chaos. The Chinese word is luan.
Luan, okay.
So any system that seems like it could cause disruption, like multi-party democracy or totally free speech, feels risky. It feels like it could lead back to that weakness.
So it's history reinforcing the present narrative.
And maybe even cultural values play a role. The analysis mentioned how traditional Chinese culture sometimes emphasizes collective stability over individual freedoms. So the party's strong hand is seen as ensuring order, preventing the kind of turmoil seen elsewhere, like, say, during the Arab Spring.
That makes sense. Fear of chaos plus a cultural value on stability. It paints democracy as a gamble. And if you haven't lived it, maybe you just see the negatives highlighted by the state media.
Exactly. The understanding might be based more on stereotypes, like it's just politicians arguing and making slogans, not actually solving problems effectively.
Okay, so that gives us a pretty good picture of the why. But now let's get into some of the interesting contradictions that the analysis brought up. This is where it gets really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely some tensions there.
Like the first one, economic success is all thanks to the party. But economic problems are the West's fault.
Right. A bit of a logical knot. If the party gets all the credit for prosperity, you'd think they'd also own the downturns. But often, things like slower growth, or that high youth unemployment we mentioned, or the property market issues, those get blamed largely on external factors. Western containment, trade wars, tech restrictions.
So it's selective credit taking. Good stuff is internal, bad stuff is external.
Pretty much. It often overlooks internal issues, policy impacts or structural problems.
Yeah.
And it simplifies things,
Yeah.
right? China's economy is super connected globally. Problems are rarely just one external cause.
Okay, what's another contradiction? The national pride versus using Western stuff.
Yeah, that one's interesting too. There's huge pride in Chinese achievements like 5G, high-speed rail, the space program, a real sense of having caught up or surpassed the West.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as the analysis noted, there's a lot of engagement with Western consumer culture. iPhones, Starbucks, Hollywood movies, NBA, Western fashion, travel aspirations.
So criticizing the West politically but enjoying its products and culture.
Seems like it. And maybe more fundamentally, there's still a dependence on some core Western tech, like advanced computer chips or operating systems. The whole Huawei situation with U.S. sanctions really brought that vulnerability to light. It clashes a bit with the idea of total self-reliance.
And didn't the notes also mention people seeking education or even opportunities abroad?
Yeah, that's another layer. Families, even those expressing strong national pride, might still see value in Western universities or even immigration, which makes you wonder if the China model is seen as superior in all ways, why look outward for those specific things?
Okay, here's a big one. The free speech paradox. Supporting censorship at home, but using free speech abroad.
Yes, that's a classic point often raised. They might support the Great Firewall and content controls within China, arguing it's needed for, social harmony, preventing chaos.
Right, keeping things stable.
But then, they might be very active on platforms like X or YouTube platforms outside the firewall that champion free expression, using that very freedom to push nationalist views, argue with critics, defend China.
So they use the tools of free speech on Western platforms while arguing against having those same tools available back home.
Exactly. It raises that question. If free speech is inherently so dangerous or bad, why engage in it so vigorously yourself, even if just in specific online spaces? It definitely seems contradictory.
Okay, one more tension point. The perception of widespread prosperity versus the reality of inequality.
Right. The narrative might suggest everyone's doing great, everyone can afford a car now, but the stats tell a more complex story. China's Gini coefficient, which measures inequality, is actually quite high.
Higher than many developed countries, right?
Significantly higher, yeah. Around 0.46 in 2023, according to the notes. We already talked about the pressures young people face unemployment, that intense competition or involution.
But those personal struggles often get blamed externally, too.
Frequently, yeah. Framed as results of Western pressure rather than maybe internal structural issues like mismatches between education and jobs or the fallout from the property crisis. It's like a selective optimism focus on the shiny achievements, downplay the persistent problems like debt or inequality.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. How does the official narrative actually describe China's own political system? There's this term, whole process people's democracy. What's that about?
Right, that's the official framing. The idea is that it's a different, supposedly more comprehensive form of democracy where people are involved throughout the entire governance cycle, elections, decision-making, implementation, supervision.
Through bodies like the National People's Congress, the NPC.
Yeah, the NPC consultative conferences. These are presented as the mechanisms for this whole process, democracy.
But how does that hold up when you compare it to, say, standard international ideas of what democracy involves?
Well, that's where the analysis highlights some pretty significant contradictions. Let's break it down. First, whole process versus competitive elections. Yes, there are elections, like for the NPC. But the party's leadership is written into the Constitution. There's no real multi-party competition where the ruling party could actually lose power nationally. Candidates are vetted. So it lacks that element of genuine choice and potential for power transfer that you see in many other systems.
Okay, so limited competition. What else?
Then there's people ruling versus concentrated power. In reality, power is very much concentrated within the party leadership, the elite. Bodies like the NPC are often seen as implementing the party's decisions rather than acting as an independent check or truly representing diverse public views. Representation itself is skewed often more officials and elites than workers or farmers. And there aren't really ways for citizens to directly hold the top leaders accountable.
And the broad participation aspect, how does that square with censorship?
That's a key tension. There are channels for input, like commenting on draft laws, but they can be quite formalistic. And the huge factor is censorship, the great firewall, media control. It massively restricts open public debate, especially on sensitive issues.
So participation is kind of within approved boundaries.
Largely, yes. Think about the zero COVID policy, that there wasn't really broad, open public debate beforehand, or the way critics, like lawyers or scholars, can be silenced. It suggests participation is mostly welcome if it aligns with the official direction.
And claiming to be the most democratic while criticizing Western democracy, how does that work?
Logically, it's tricky. The analysis points out they criticize Western systems for being chaotic or just for show, but then claim superiority without having things like multi-party competition or an independent judiciary. It often involves highlighting every problem in the West while glossing over the checks and balances that exist there.
Selective comparison again.
Exactly. And finally, this idea of stability in democracy. The Chinese model clearly prioritizes stability, seeing dissent as a risk. But many democratic models see disagreement, even protest, as essential for progress and accountability. Suppressing dissent might keep things quiet short-term, but some argue that unchecked centralized power can lead to big mistakes or rigidity down the line. Plus, with information being so controlled, it's hard to know if policies truly reflect genuine public opinion.
Okay, that makes the official claims and the reality seem quite far apart sometimes. So we've looked inside the viewpoint, the contradictions, the official story. How do other people see this group, the little pinks? The insights covered a few perspectives.
Yeah, that was interesting. First, looking within China itself at people who maybe know more about the outside world but tend to stay quiet.
What's their take?
The analysis suggests they often understand the role of education, propaganda, maybe even feel some sympathy, like they see this group as perhaps influenced by the system or maybe just in a tough spot where speaking out is risky.
But they're also critical.
Often, yeah. They might find the really strong nationalist rhetoric a bit emotional, maybe lacking nuance, based on an incomplete picture. There could be a sense of frustration, comparing their own need for caution with the loud, sometimes maybe performative patriotism they see online, and maybe worry about the impact on China's image.
Okay, what about people in Taiwan? How do they view them?
The sense there is often one of alertness, even estrangement. They see the little pinks and their hardline views on reunification as fueling cross-strait tensions.
And they question the nationalism itself.
Very much so. It's often seen as state-manipulated propaganda, not necessarily genuine popular will. And there's a fundamental identity clash, right? The little pinks emphasize one unified Chinese nation, but many Taiwanese, especially younger ones, identify primarily as Taiwanese, with their own history and society. So it leads to resentment, a feeling of being misunderstood.
And sometimes online mockery, like the blast hearts comment.
Yeah, that kind of dismissive or sarcastic reaction comes up.
And finally, how about in Europe and the West?
Here, the main reaction seems to be concern about the radical nationalism. It's often seen as reflecting the government's stance, maybe part of that more assertive wolf warrior diplomacy or online presence.
Is there any understanding or just concern?
There can be some understanding, seeing them as products of a censored information environment stuck behind the Great Firewall, maybe a bit of intellectual sympathy for that situation. But that's often mixed with strong criticism of the hostility towards Western values like free speech, and especially the aggressive online behavior.
Like attacking brands or artists.
Exactly. That kind of action is often seen as just internet mob behavior, disrespectful, and it can unfortunately lead to negative stereotypes about Chinese people in general, clashing hard with Western ideas about individual expression and respectful debate.
So this leads to a really tough question that came up in the notes. How do you engage? Should you feel sympathy for people holding these views, especially if they seem based on limited info? Or should you try to change their minds, even if communication is hard?
It's a real dilemma. The value of sympathy, as the analysis suggests, is that understanding the why, the propaganda, the lived experience of progress, the information limits can help. It can maybe ease conflict, open tiny doors for dialogue. It's understanding the context, not agreeing with the content.
But sympathy has limits, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't mean excusing harmful actions like online attacks. And you have to be realistic. Is engaging actually achieving anything? And you need to protect yourself if the interaction just becomes hostile.
And what about trying to actively change their values?
The analysis suggests that's incredible, possibly.
Mm.
And accepting that, sometimes you just can't change someone's deeply held beliefs, and trying endlessly might just be draining and counterproductive.
Okay, one last related point that was raised. This idea that the hostility we sometimes see online might not just be arrogance, but could actually stem from a deeper insecurity.
Yeah, that's a really interesting psychological angle. The analysis explored a couple of routes for this.
Like the history.
Exactly. That century of humiliation history could create extreme sensitivity to criticism. So an aggressive online defense might be overcompensating for past weakness, a way to project strength.
And maybe a gap between the official strong nation story and personal struggles.
That too. If the propaganda promises greatness, but you're facing unemployment or intense competition, maybe attacking outsiders becomes a way to deflect from that internal tension and bolster collective pride.
And the information bubble plays a role again.
For sure. If you don't have access to balanced comparisons, any criticism can feel like an unfair attack, triggering a defensive reaction because you lack the context to evaluate it differently.
So the hostility could be seen as overcompensation, a sign of fragility underneath.
That's the argument. Truly confident individuals or groups maybe don't need to constantly attack others. The intensity of the reaction could, paradoxically, suggest an underlying insecurity about their position or the narrative they hold on to.
Wow. Okay. So wrapping this all up, we've covered a lot. The reasons behind this viewpoint: economy, education, nationalism, history, the contradictions, the selective blame, the consumerism paradox, the free speech issue, the inequality gap, the official whole process democracy narrative, and its tensions.
And how different groups see it: the internal silent critics, the wary Taiwanese, the concerned Westerners, plus the really difficult questions about empathy versus trying to change minds, and that final thought about hostility perhaps masking insecurity.
It's definitely complex, shaped by so many powerful forces: history, money, information, psychology.
Absolutely. And understanding this perspective, even with all its knots and contradictions, feels pretty crucial today. It helps you make sense of online interactions, global dynamics, even if you can't directly communicate or change minds easily.
Which really leads us to that final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. In a world where information is often tightly controlled, where values clash so sharply, how do we navigate that? How do we try to build understanding, or at least find ways to coexist without abandoning our own values? Is the goal really to change minds, or is it more about deeply understanding the forces that shape them in the first place?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you so much for bringing this topic and these insights to us for this deep dive. It's given us a ton to consider. Keep observing, keep asking those questions, keep thinking critically.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Join us next time as we dive into another fascinating subject.
Until then.
See ya.